How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf 40 of Masechta Menachos, friends. Okay, today's a different kind of daf than we've had the last few days. It's like not particularly big. It's a little bit, I don't know. It feels like kind of the devil's in the details in this one. But I'm going to take the path of least resistance, I think. But anyways, okay. On today's daf, why the people in Jerusalem did not wear tzitzis on linen garments. We're going to learn about why that was the case. Garments of multiple fabrics, that's going to be a tiny little thing, but is an interesting thing. And Taisev lo mina asui. Okay, this is something that actually came up interestingly when it came to mezuzah, which I didn't really quite understand at the time what the link was between mezuzah and tzitzis per se. But anyways, forget about mezuzah. Taisev lo mina asui, right? Gedilim taiselach. Taisev lo mina asui. We are going to get to that. That is, I would say, just like an important. It's just Taisev lo mina asui is just a good, wholesome. I don't know how to say. It's not like a geva. It's not like a shmaka sugya at all. That's the thing. It's like the way it manifests over here is like kind of technical, but Taisev lo mina asui is just it's one of those shas concepts, that is just like it's on our daf, which is a great thing. So, friends, daf 40 of Masechta Menachos. Here we go, friends. We begin daf mem amud aleph. All the way at the top, at the very beginning, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught this is also a Mishnah in Masechta Edius. Sodin b'tzitzis, when it comes to donning tzitzis, when putting tzitzis strings on a linen garment, Beis Shammai potrin. Beis Shammai say potter. Beis Shammai say that we do not put tzitzis, right? And since tzitzis is maker than treles, which is wool, and linen garment is a linen garment, Beis Shammai does not hold of the smuchin of the loso bashatnes beg tzemru fiktim yachtov gdilim taiselach shatnes is waved by tzitzis. They don't hold of it. And therefore they say don't put tzitzis on linen. Just leave it. Uvesilo mechaybin. But Beis Hillel say that you do put, right, that shatnez is waived when it comes to tzitzis, and you put tzitzis on linen. The halacha is like Beis Hillel Amr Eliezer B'Rab Tzadik, says Eliezer B'Rab Tzadik. V'alei kol hamatil tcheles bisdino b'Yushalayim. I live in Yerushalayim. Eno elo min ha-masmin. The people would be very perplexed if somebody walk the streets of Jerusalem wearing a linen garment with tzitzis. The people would be very confused. So the question, so there's two ways, as I said, the devil's in the details on this stuff. So Rashi offers two ways to understand this question. The first way he offers is that it's a question on Beis Hillel. The second way to offer is a question on Beis Shammai. Honestly, I think asking it on Beis Shammai might technically make it a little better. I think Tosfos prefers that pshat. I'm going with Rashi's first shot. I think it's like a little bit easier for me. It's a very detailed daf, and there's all sorts of, when you get into the details, there's a lot, it gets subtle. I'm just going to assume that this is Beis Hillel. And what's happening is that if, in fact, the halacha is like Beis Hillel, that linen garments require tzitzis, why would it be so perplexing to the people in Jerusalem when they would see somebody wearing a linen garment with tzitzis? That's the halacha. What's so perplexing about the halacha? Again, Amr Eliezer B'Rab Tzadik, how could it be that the halacha is that linen garments do have tzitzis? That anybody who would put treles on his linen garment in Jerusalem, he would confuse and perplex and astonish everyone. Rebbe says, Imkein Lama Asura, why did they make it Asur in Jerusalem? The Fisha Ein Bikin, because the people in Jerusalem were not experts. And the concern was that, well, if you say put tzitzis on the linen garments, well, then people are going to say, wait a second, I thought that woolen tzitzis and linen garments, I thought wool and linen don't go together. Isn't that what's called shatnez? Oh, I guess I was just dreaming. I guess shatnez is not really a thing. Wonder why I thought it was. Basically, the issue is that because the people were not experts, there was a concern that if you it opens up a can of worms. If you allow shatnez in the context of tzitzis, people are going to think that you can also wear shatnez all the time. So therefore, they said, you know what? We're not opening up that can of worms. Linen garments don't have tzitzis, even though Meikar Adin, Allah was like Beis Hillel, that there is tzitzis. Rashi says, well, how can they, if it's chayiv and tzitzis, it's chayiv and tzitzis. How'd you say now? Well, it's sheva al taisa. Okay, we're not saying to violate an avera. We're saying hold back on this mitzvah from this mitzvah say, and specifically when we're talking about linen garments, instead prefer woolen garments. Okay. Omle Ravit bar Rav Chone le Ravit v'lirmu be asara. But how about this? Why don't we get 10 people? V'napku l'shuka, and let's get 10 people. They'll all go out in linen garments to Shuk Machne Yehuda, wearing tzitzis on their linen garments, and let's just what's the call? What am I thinking of? Let's just set the record straight once and for all. Umifarsim alamilsa, and we'll just let it be known that it's okay to put tzitzis on your linen garments. Don't look at us linen garment wearers like we have two heads. We're just like everybody else, and we're even just like you. If you have a linen garment, you could put tzitzis on your linen garments. Kolshken di mismau ilovon. To which the Gemara says, no, that is not going to be helpful. That's going to be counterproductive. They will be even more confused. If seeing one person wearing linen tzitzis will be confusing to them, seeing 10 people, Rashi points out, particularly when we're talking about people of stature, wearing shatnez will be very highly confusing to these people. Let's not do that. V'lidrasha b'firka. Why don't we teach it in a shir? Teach it in what the base of Egypt. Teach it when we're teaching the people. What does Rashi say? Does it say anything? No. The pirka, I think, is basically when you're teaching all the people, maybe in the Beis HaMedrash, maybe when all the people get together around the Yom Tov, maybe. I think the point is, why don't you teach it like publicly so that everybody kind of let's set the record straight in the Beis HaMedrash, I guess, rather than in the shuk. Well, we're concerned about indigo. If we tell the people, hey, even if you have linen garments, you can put tchelis on it. Well, meaning tzitzis, which includes tchelis. Well, there's a concern that, indigo looks similar to tchelis, and maybe some tchelis mongers are going to be selling indigo, and the people won't know. And then they're gonna be thinking that they're wearing tcheles, but they're actually just wearing indigo, and that will be shatnez. V'lo yeh ela lavon. Okay, but who cares if it's not technically tcheles? After all, you can wear white woolen strings, even though the white woolen strings are not tcheles. So you're wearing indigo woolen strings. What's the big deal? Kevin de efsher b'mino. Lo. Well, since those indigo woolen strings could instead be linen strings, so we would prefer the linen strings rather than the indigo. We would prefer linen strings for a linen garment rather than woolen indigo strings. Tcheles would be okay, but not woolen indigo. In this case, we would prefer linen. Kidrish lakish, damarish lakish. Kol malkum shata motzei. So interestingly, Rish Lakish is viewing this from a standpoint of Esse Velosase. Honestly, in this sense, I feel like maybe Beis Shammai makes a little more sense here, but anyways. But Rish Lakish seems to be viewing this from a perspective of Esse Velotase rather than Smuchin, right? According to Beis Hillel, he learns of Smuchin, which means that basically shatnez is waived when it comes to tzitzis, but Rish Lakish is viewing this from a perspective of essay velo, right? Essay dochelosa say that we have the pasuk, the essay of Gedilim Taiselach, and we have the losa say of Loisil Bashatnes. The essay of Gedilim Taiselach is doche the losa say of Loisil Bashatnes. But at the same time, if you can avoid essay dochelosa say, so for example, by making strings of linen for a linen garment, and then you don't need to get into the whole shatnez sugya, well, then we don't want you wearing woolen indigo strings. If tchela is fine, but woolen indigo strings, when instead you could be wearing linen and avoid the whole sugya of esei dochelot aseh, and instead you just being Mekayim mitzvah with linen, that would be preferred. Therefore, we don't want you using indigo strings, even though technically they shouldn't be really different than using white woolen strings. Again, Kid Rish Lakish, Dam Rish Lakish, I don't even know if we read Rish Lakish yet. Kol makom shata motzei essay velo saseh, that in a scenario of an essay and a lo taseh, the essay being Gedilim Taiselach, the lo taiseh being lo silbas shatnis, and sure, we say that the essay is doche de lo saseh in general. However, mato yochel lekayim eshneim, but if you can make everybody happy by, say, having a garment, right, I'd say a linen garment with linen strings rather than woolen strings, mutab, that would be better. Ve'im lav, and if that's not a possibility, so beseder yavo eseh v'yitches lo saiseh, then you can rely on eseh doch lo saiseh. But in this case, we don't want to rely on people potentially using indigo woolen strings for a linen garment. So we want to avoid that whole thing. Okay, we're gonna end up throwing this whole indigo thing out. So if you have things that like a little bit iffy and not adding up, or it's like, why not just use linen strings? We'll get to other scenarios. Okay. Then lav yavo essay vitches lo saiseh. Fine. V'liv dekua. So why not? If the concern is about indigo strings, why not just do a test? There are ways to test if the dye is indigo dye or if it's tchelas dye. Well, elexer mishum te'ima. Well, we're concerned that for samples, we're going to learn about on Daf Mem Beis, I think, that samples are not allowed. You can't use these. If you have a sample tcheles string, that can't be used. That's been made lishma, not as a sample. Therefore, it can't be used as tzitzis. And we're concerned that even if you could test it out, but we're concerned people are going to be selling samples. Okay, and that's not allowed. V'lichtiva adiski. So how about this? Why don't you just write a letter to all the tcheles factories and the tcheles mongers and say, don't sell samples. Adiski lechem v'lismoch. What we're gonna rely on everybody's potential shatnez scenarios based on a letter that was sent to all the tcheles mongers. Amuravis says Rava, why not? Hashta chometz bepesach v'yom kippurim dekaris amchinan adiski. When it comes to if we make a leap year of udder, if we make a double udder, so we send out letters to all the people to say, hey, it's a double udder. And that has to deal with dates. That affects when Pesach falls out. It affects when Yom Kippur falls out. That affects Chiyuvei Karis of Chametz B'Pesach, eating on Yom Kippur. And we rely on letters for that. So why not rely on letters for tcheles mongers? Hocha de ese be'alma lo kol sheken. Right, again, Chametz B'Pesach v'Yom Kippurim dekaris amchinun adiskei. Hocha de ese be'alma lo kol sheken. Certainly we should be able to rely upon letters in the case of tzitzis. There's no chiv karis or anything. Ela omar rovet. Okay, here we get to the final answers. This is why in Yerushalayim they did not wear tzitzis on linen garments. Ela omar rovet hamilsa amri. I said the following: Ve'edma b'may rovet mishmei de Reb Zeire, and it was stated in Eretz Yisrael in the name of Reb Zeire, Kavasi like me. Shema Yikareya Sidino Besoch Gimel V'Yispren Vatorah Omar Taisev Lo Mino Osui. No, who wants to explain this? What it means is that there's a concern that if you have a linen garment with tzitzis on it, there is a concern that what might happen is the linen garment in the area where the tzitzis would be tzitzis, would be tied. Maybe before tying the tzitzis, the garment will tear at the corner area, basically. So you'll say, okay, nish gefährlich, and you take some linen thread and you sew up the tear. And then you'll say, wow, I have a lot of extra slack here hanging off of this garment. Maybe I'll just leave this slack. I won't cut it off, and that will just be my tzitzis strings. And then he goes and he takes some tcheles, adds it to the thread that was already there from having sewed up the garment, and he'll say, great, now I can make tzitzis. The problem is, ta'asev lo mina asur, you have to make tzitzis. You can't just utilize that which is already there, and here he's utilizing the threads that were already there from when he just sewed up the tear. And that's not okay. Again, Elohimai Ravi rather says Ravi, Hamilsa Amri, I said this thing, Vitmar b'mai Ravi Mishum, the Rib Zer was stated in Eretz Yisrael, the name of Rib Zer Kavasi, like what I'm saying, Shema Yikare Sdino, that we're concerned that maybe the linen garment, the tzitzis garment, will tear Besoch Gimel within 3 finger breadths of the end of the garment, that is the area where the tzitzis are tied, V'yispirenu, and he will then sew up the tear, and there will be extra threads left over, and he won't cut them off. He'll leave them to be his linen tzitzis threads, and then it will add to it woolen tcheles threads, and he'll say, great, I have tzitzis. But the fact of the matter is, the Torah says, make tzitzis, don't use that which is already there. And therefore, the tzitzis will be puzzle. And if the tzitzis are puzzle, he's not doing a mitzvah. If he's not doing a mitzvah, then what's he left with? Shatnez. He's got woolen tcheles on a linen garment, and it's not the mitzvah of tzitzis because he used those leftover threads, and it will be geferlach. It will be a problem, a violation of shatnez. So therefore we say, don't, they said in Yerushalayim, don't put tzitzis on linen garments. Shar Reb Zera lisdine, so Reb Zera went ahead and released the tzitzis that he had on his woolen garment. Reb Zera Omar Gezerah Shema, Gezerah Mishum Ksus Laila. Rav Zera, so Tosas points out, Rav Zera is different than Rebbe Zera. And Tosas also points out that this is unlike a Rashi in Ksubis, where he says that Rav Zera, it's the same person, just Rav Zera is before he went to Eretz Yisrael and got smicha, and Rebbe Zera is after he went to Eretz Yisrael and got smicha. So, unclear if it's Rav Zera or Rebbe Zera. I feel like I don't see Rav Zera too often. But anyways, says Rav Zera that the concern is about Ksus Laila. I believe that this is more, we'll get more into discussion within the next few days about Uri'isem also, the requirement for tzitzis dafka to be during the day. But anyways, the concern is if he's going to be wearing a linen garment with woolen tzitzis at night, well, there's no mitzvah of tzitzis then, and at that he will be then in violation of shatnez, and therefore in Yerushalayim they said simply avoid tzitzis on linen garments. We now briefly discuss the topic of garments of multiple fabrics. Ve'omar Rava, and says Rava Amilsa Amri, I said the following thing, B'hitma b'mai Rava mishmei Reb Zera, and it was stated in Eretz Yisrael in the name of Reb Zera, Kavasi, like what I said, like me. He shall beged uknafeh shel or. If you have a garment, that the garment itself is made of clothing material, but the corners where the tzitzis would be tied is hide, is some kind of a leather, and the assumption being that clothing was not made out of leather, and therefore tzitzis garment would not be made out of leather. So we say, even though the corners are leather, chayebes, you still need to put on tzitzis because the main body of the garment is a clothing material. He shall, or if the main body of the garment is leather, i.e. not a clothing material, the knafel shel beged, but the corners are clothing material, ptura, it is ptura from tzitzis my time. How come? Ikr beged ba'ina, and we go based on the main beged, the main material of the garment. I believe the Shulchan Aruch says that we go similarly based on the majority material. Rav Achai Ozu Basar Kanaf, Rav Achai actually went based on the corner. That was his determining factor. And yeah, so what's interesting is that even though we said yesterday that, for example, silk would be chayiv in tzitzis, over here we're saying that if you have a garment made out of something that is simply not a clothing material, right? The assumption being that leather, right, clothing was not made out of leather. And therefore, it's bichlal, not even midrabanan. Yesterday, machlokas by silk, for example, is a chayv midaraisa. But even if it's not chayv midaraisa, even according to Rav Nachman, it's nonetheless chayv midrabanan. But if it comes to like something like leather, that the assumption is it's not a clothing material, so it simply will be potter from tzitzis completely. And friends, now we will discuss more of the concept of ta'aseh v'lo minha asui. Oh, my Rav says, Rav Amar Rav Sechora Amar Rav Huna Hitil le bailas shalosh. So let's say you have a garment with three corners. I don't know, maybe it's like a triangular garment. I don't know. It has three corners. And a three-cornered garment is potter from tzitzis. You don't have to put tzitzis on a three-cornered garment. And so if somebody did put tzitzis on a three-cornered garment, which is completely unnecessary and unuseful, Veshlima la'arba, and then he adds another, he sews a fourth corner onto the garment. Now it is a four-cornered garment. So he says, okay, well, great. I already have three tzitzises. I must only add a fourth, and then I will be yotzei the mitzvah of tzitzis. Right? Wrong. The shliva la'arba adds a fourth tzitzis, psula, mishum taisev lo min also. You have to make the tzitzis, you can't use what was already pointlessly there. And the three existing tzitzises from when it was a triangle, it were pointlessly there. When adding the fourth corner and then adding simply one more tzitzis will not work. You're going to have to create four tzitzises. Meisvei. However, we have a contradiction. Chasidim Arishonim, the original Chasidim, the original Chasids, like in the time of the Gemara, says Rashi, Chasidim zrizin b'mitzvahs. They were very excited about mitzvahs. Kevan she'ergu ba gimel, once already they would weave the minimum shear of a garment, they were already itching to add tzitzis. And the way I understand it practically, I don't know, I might be wrong, was basically, if you look at a regular tzitzis, it's like kind of like a little talus. So it's kind of like a long rectangle with a hole in the middle for your head. And then, so basically they would start weaving it at one end. Immediately after they would weave kind of the first corners of it, they would immediately put on tzitzis. They simply couldn't wait. That, wow, we got two corners already. Great. They would put on the tzitzis. And then, but they were still working on the garment. They were still weaving it. And then finally, when it was complete, then they would add the other two tzitzis. But they added the first two tzitzis when it was an incomplete garment, when it was pointless to do so. So again, Chasidim Arishonim came into Ergu ba Gimel, when they had the minimum shear of a garment, they would already start adding the tzitzis. They're already putting on tcheles. How could that be? Because then when they got to the end of the garment, the ones that were there from when they were excited at the beginning were made when they were pointless. How is that acceptable? I don't know how to translate this literally, but what it means is that no, it doesn't mean that from the beginning they would put in tcheles, tzitzis. It means that when they got to the end, and they were within 3 finger breadths of the end, which is already the earliest point that you could start, right? Basically, you hang the tzitzis strings within 3 finger breadths of the end of the garment. So immediately when they got to within 3 finger breadths of the end of the garment, they weren't yet done with the garment, but they were so close to the end, they couldn't resist, they couldn't hold themselves back. They immediately put on the tzitzis. At that point, even before they finished the garment, but at that point it was already close enough to the end of the garment, within 3, right? If they would have, right, they tied the tzitzis and then they added, 2 more finger breadths or whatever, but still the net result is that the tzitzis are kosher. So that's what it means. They would not tie tzitzis prematurely because that would be a concern of tasev lo min ha'asui. But what they would do is immediately at the earliest possible time, they would already tie the tzitzis even before finishing weaving the garment. But wait a second. Do we really say taise v'lo min ha'asui? Reb Zera says, hitil li muteles kshera. This is an interesting scenario. You have a garment, a 4-cornered garment that already has tzitzis on it. And then you say, well, I want to replace replace, but I want to upgrade the tzitzis. I want to tie new tzitzis. And what he does is, he starts adding new tzitzis. He adds 1 more tzitzis, a 5th tzitzis, a 6th, a 7th. And then he adds the 8th. And when he then cuts off the original ones, voila, he has an upgraded tzitzis. The thing is, why is that acceptable? Because when he added the 5th tzitzis and the 6th tzitzis and the 7th tzitzis, they were pointless tzitzis because we're talking about a garment that already had 4 tzitzis. It was already tzitzis. So we're talking about a garment that already had 4 tzitzis. Adding a 5th, a 6th, a 7th are absolutely pointless. And yet, we're saying that when he's all done, it's kosher tzitzis. What about the fact that tasev lo min ha'asui, that he was working with tzitzis that were added pointlessly? My Rava says, skip the next word, but baltosif koi. Well, it's baltosif. Here's the thing: adding a 5th tzitzis is baltosif. Don't add to the mitzvahs, right? If the mitzvah is 4 tzitzis on the garment, don't add a 5th. And when he added a 5th, when he added a 6th, when he added a 7th, it was baltosif. It was adding on to mitzvos illegally. Maise lo havim, because he was in violation of baltosif, it doesn't count as a maise. So it doesn't, right? Meaning taise v'lo min ha'asui, you have to make tzitzis, not utilize that which was already made. It doesn't count as if you made anything, since you're in violation of baltosif when you were quote unquote making these extra tzitzis. So maise lo havim, it's not considered a maise, and therefore it's not considered tasev lo min ha'asui. Maskef for Papa's asks Akasha, he says, Mimai de gavilo sufe kamichavim. We don't know what was going on in his noggin when he added tzitzis number 5, number 6, and number 7. Who says that his intention was to add on to the existing mitzvah? Maybe his intention was simply to be mevatel the initial ones, that he was adding new ones in order to get rid of the original ones. And it wasn't baltosif. Baltosif leka de umaisa ika. Therefore, it's not baltosif. There is a maisa. So why aren't we saying tasev lo min ha'asui? Good question. Reb Zera says, Reb Zera, Reb Masno, Reb Shmuel, tcheles, ein ba mishum kilayim, va'afilu b'talis p'tura. That tzitzis, there's no issue of kilayim. And the assumption right now is that we're talking about, you put like 2 threads of tcheles, 2 threads, right? Two threads of wool, 2 threads of linen. We're saying that there's no issue of kilayim, even by a talis p'tura. My talis p'tura, what's a talis p'tura? That there's no kilayim by a talis p'tura. An exempt talis. Ilem delays b'shi'ura. If you're saying it's a talis that doesn't have the proper shear, a talis that's too small, doesn't have the proper shear, there's no issue of kilayim. But v'atanya, we're learning about a talis shakoin miskasebo, a talis that is large enough for a child to wrap himself in. Rosha Brubo, his head, most of his body. Ve'agodol yotze bo derech arai, and a adult is able to go out in this garment in sort of a non-official way. Chayev b'tzitzis will be chayev in tzitzis. Ein akotin miskase bo rosha v'rubo. If it is too small for a child to wrap his head and most of his body in. Afal pi she'agodol yotza ba arai. Even if a adult were to go out with it in a happenstance kind of way, p'tura, it is p'tura from tzitzis. V'chein le'inyan kilayim, and similarly, when it comes to kilayim. What does it mean? It's similarly for kilayim. If you're going to say that it's just like there's no chiyuv tzitzis, there's also no chiyuv of kilayim. That there won't be any issue of shatnez on this garment. But we learned ein arai b'kelim. That the Mishnah in Masechta Kilayim says, ein arai b'kilayim. That the Mishnah Masechta Kilayim says that when it comes to shatnez, when it comes to kilayim, there's no concept of happenstance, of non-official. The Mishnah there says that even, for example, if let's say you have a corrupt tax collector and the tax collectors would not collect taxes on clothing that you were wearing, so therefore you have this shatnez garment and you put it on top of your clothes, not because you were interested in it, just so you wouldn't have to pay tax on it. That's not allowed. Even in that case, it's not allowed. So therefore, here we have this garment that, it says, we're saying we have something, it's too small for a child, but maybe an adult goes out in it. We're saying that b'chelin and kilayim, we're saying that there's no kilayim, but what do you mean? The Mishnah says even just sort of unofficial, right? Arai, I'm struggling to temporary, right? Temporary manner. There still would be kilayim. What it means is that you would be unable to wear a linen garment with woolen tzitzis. Meaning, just like we're saying that there's no tzitzis on this small garment, and v'chein le'inyon sadim b'tzitzis. And similarly, when it comes to a linen garment with woolen strings, you would not be able to wear that on this small garment. So what did we say initially? We said we said that by this exempt talis, there's no kilayim by tzitzis. But we had just said that by the small garment, you cannot have a linen garment with wool and tzitzis. Elamai, ptura, what does it mean? Ptura, hitil limuteles. It's talking about the previous scenario that we had. You have a garment that already has tzitzis on it, and then you add another tzitzis, and that additional tzitzis is shatnez. We're saying that it's okay because since we say that by tzitzis, shatnez is waived, so therefore, even when adding to a tzitzis, a garment that already has tzitzis on it, the same would apply. There would not be shatnez. Reb Zera already said that that there's no issue of adding on to a garment and then, to replace the initial ones. So it was saying, yes, when it comes to this garment that already has 4 tzitzis and then you add on and you replace them and stuff, we said it's fine. There's no issue of tasev lo menasui over there. And similarly, there's also no issue of kilayim either. That was Daf Mem of Masechta Menachos. On Daf Mem of Masechta Menachos, we learned about why the people in Jerusalem did not wear tzitzis on linen garments. Ultimately, we had this whole bahalach about indigo and stuff. Ultimately, we said, number one, in case the linen tears and the linen string is left behind, the linen thread, I forgot to add the word thread, is left behind as a tzitzis string, and there will be an issue of taisiv lo menasui. That's one reason why, and therefore the garment would be pasul, and there would be an issue of shatnez. Secondly, in case the garment is worn at night, right? We don't wear tzitzis, there's no mitzvah tzitzis at night, and therefore there would be no reason for kilayim to be waved at night, and therefore the people in Jerusalem, they would not wear shatnez tzitzis for those concerns. Garments of multiple fabrics, it's judged by the main fabric. If the main fabric is leather, it is potter from tzitzis, even though the corners are regular garment fabric. And then we discussed taisev velo min ha'asui, that you have to make tzitzis. You can't just utilize that which happens to already be there. Friends, that was the mem of Masechta Menachos. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.